right. Matt Briggs in the house! I'm so excited I can freak. It's not just this muscle car that gets me excited, it's my guest today. Sooth Spider is in the chat already. Look at that, garden variety human. That should be good. Just give me a sound check if you're in the chat already, please, for this one. Just to make sure everybody's lined up. It should be okay. I just started it. Thank you there, sir. And yes, we are speaking to William M. Briggs today. He is a member of this Broken Science Initiative. It's my first BSI guest. If you didn't follow my directive yesterday and go and overload the website of brokenscience.org with your signups, please do it today so that Emily and Greg get a little blip in their website traffic and they see when we mention us. It would be really great to show them the power of Gigaohm Biological. Matt, you may recognize Rodney Mullen here in this little spin.
Oh, yeah. Guy's a sweetheart.
Oh my goodness. Did you know that he got surgery on his spine and now he can stand up straight and like skating again, like differently, and he's got to relearn everything now because his body moves again? It's crazy.
I'll be dog. No, I had no idea.
Yeah. Apparently he's got like 3 more inches on him now.
I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a...
I want you to go meet my friend Mark on this show that's now on the screen after this. I think he's a really good guy, and you guys would be good acquaintances, I think, to me.
Sure.
And he's got readers that watch him, you know, so you're a book guy. I mean, he's got readers. Not that my viewers don't read, I'm not saying that, but Mark has got some really studious followers. I really like Mark's show.
I think truth is good for kids. We're so busy lying, we don't even recognize the truth no more in society. We want everybody to feel good. That's not the way life is.
But you can tell if someone's lying, you know, you can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie, you know, I don't think I'm a liar. I try not to be a liar. I don't want to be a liar. I think it's like really important not to be a liar.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm so excited to be here today and have this show running in the afternoon, working in sync with my family, and it just feels really good to start the stream in the afternoon, and so I'm really happy that we've got Matt on the show. Just a few more seconds. I got to get this the recording in the background running, so I'm gonna keep this intro going as usual. It's like 1 more minute or so. I think a minute, 20 seconds.
This is so crazy. I feel so nervous. Like, what in the world, man?
If you are joining us for the first time, this is Gigaohm Biological. It's a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. We are based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the back of a rented garage. And yeah, that's the state of knowledge and information in our world. We're basically working to dispel an enchantment. It is an enchantment that has been laid down a long time ago and laid down deep and thick. If you have been following me for a while, you're here at the top of the wave, where we are staying focused on the biology. We don't take the bait on TV and social media, and we love our neighbors. The way it works is that people share this work, and some people even financially contribute. and slowly biology finds new people and more people wake up. That's my plan anyway. You can find me at gigaohmbiological.com, and you should be watching at stream.gigaohm.bio if you're not already, which is the new place that I'm trying to store all these videos. And I think it's working out really well thanks to our supporter and follower Ted on the other side of the planet.
Mike Vandenberg mixtape.
These are the people that make Gigaohm Biological possible, including all of the subscribers that are giving some small or large amount monthly or even per year. There are also Substack subscribers that have recently joined the fight, and it's been really a privilege to see how far we can get with this. I hope that we can continue to bring this biology to the masses. This is the independent bright web. It's the opposite of the intellectual dark web, which is this loosely organized group of influencers that was put in place before the pandemic to control the narrative, if you will, to set this limited spectrum of debate that we are all trapped within. But it's actually an illusion that is sustained only through your active participation. You can drop your own hand from your own eyes and escape. It is just a question of non-compliance. You've got to actually accept that you've been lied to. And I think one of the most exciting things about broken science is that it really, although to steal a phrase from Greg, it may not be for everybody, but it is for anybody to understand how science has been distorted, has been essentially co-opted into something that no longer is a real pursuit of knowledge, but is instead a pursuit of noise, or the creation of noise. And I hope that somebody as sophisticated, unlike me, William M. Briggs, is going to be able to help us get through this, because the distortion of science and it's the pursuit of knowledge has been an integral part of the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses. And it is an important element of how we are governed. In fact, I would argue it is a primary way by which we are governed. And as a recovering academic biologist, I really feel as though I have a unique, sad insight into how distorted one's mind can become if you pursue questions based on this reiterative Popperian questioning mechanism and don't realize how easily that can spin out of control and stop producing knowledge and instead produce noise. I believe that's how the intellectual dark web works, and I believe that's how they've essentially removed our ability to exercise informed consent with almost anything, with regard to socioeconomic status and also with regard to public health, with regard to the education of our children. We just so clueless that we just don't have the ability to exercise informed consent anymore. And one of the primary bats with barbed wire wrapped around it is this use of academic science to create the illusion of knowledge that can then be used against us in a technocratic sort of way. Oh my gosh, I'm still talking. Let me see. I got him over here. Yes, good. I'm gonna put this down and I'm gonna shut this music off. And I'm going to say hello to my good friend, William M. Briggs. Actually, Matt and I met on a beach, and it was very romantic. Matt was overdressed for the beach, and I was flying my kite. And I don't know, we later met at another meeting, and so it was wonderful. We've been friends since. I don't know. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us what you're up to, and then we'll just, I don't know, randomly discuss our.
I'm just the guys, Greg Glassman and Emily Kaplan, like you said, the broken science thing. They found me, and I've been delighted to be able to have found them in return, and people like yourself. There's a core group of people who understand what's going on and what's going wrong with science, I should say. It's not everybody, like you say, like Greg says, but it is some people anyway, and we are trying to gather together and at least speak to those willing to listen about what we think is wrong with science and how we could go about fixing it. And my background is, like yourself, a recovering academic. You know, I started off in academia. I was I was in the Department of Medicine at Cornell University, the med school. I was a statistician there, biostatistician there.
I'm sorry, but my favorite part is the fact that you were a meteorologist, because when I was a child, I thought that the weather was also very fascinating, and I sat outside in thunderstorms and stuff. I thought that tornado warnings were kind of cool, and my parents never understood it, but I was never afraid of these things. I just thought they were.
It is interesting. The reason I got involved in it, I was in the Air Force a long time ago doing cryptography. And I was wondering, should I get out of the Air Force and do something more useful with my life? And at that time, this was in the late 80s, early 90s, global warming, as it was called then, was a thing. And I thought, hey, this is interesting. And I wrote some of the people in the original IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, some of the scientists involved in that. And I was just this nobody sergeant at Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa. And I said, hey, can I read this and that paper? And this one gentleman sent it to me. And to my surprise, I could read it. So I thought, you know what, maybe I better get out and do something about this. It seems so important. And I bought all this stuff. I mean, I thought it was just as dire and calamitous as was being predicted and so forth, because I was young and naive. But I progressed through my studies, and my specialty, actually, I got my PhD and not in atmospheric physics. That was my master's, but I did mathematical statistics. And the reason is, I was interested in models. What makes a good model? What makes a good climate model, medical model, biological model, any of these kind of models? And how do you tell if it's good or bad? And that involves probability and uncertainty and all this kind of a thing. So that's how I slowly became a skeptic. The more I learned about how uncertainty really works, and about how over certain everything that they push at us is. Not everything, I should say. We have a pretty good understanding of the way capacitors work, for instance, and so forth. But these are not political things. It's all the stuff that turned political that the overcertainty is vast, as we've learned to our, sadness this last 4 years.
Right. I think overcertain is a wonderful way. It really overlaps with how I've been saying it, is that you should immediately be skeptical of anyone who's certain, and then even more if they're certain about a very simple explanation for a complex thing. And oftentimes I've started with that basis of interpreting the pandemic, for example, is it just can't be this simple that somebody spilled something in Wuhan and now it's everywhere. And so anyway, what do you think from the perspective of the broad picture? How can we, in your experience, you're selling a couple books, which I just put up before, and I don't mean it to say it in a bad way. I mean it to say it in a good way, that he is capable of putting down his thoughts in a way that I can't, and has done it several times. Somewhere I can't find the Everything You Believe Is Wrong book. I know I have it, but for some reason I couldn't find it to put on the screen. But I do have the book Uncertainty, and I think because that's the one I have, that's the only one I've read. That's this one here. How do we get people interested in this philosophical level of science in a way that
most people won't be? I mean, they'll be interested in the more practical matters of, here's what these people are trying to sell you, and here's why it's wrong. I mean, we could clearly see that they're trying to manipulate you into taking certain medications and so forth, or they're trying to tell you a certain thing. Tomorrow, I have a thing on gas stoves. Now they're going after gas stoves, even as they tell you they're not going to. They want to tell you that they're bad for the environment, or they're bad for your health, and that kind of stuff. So we could show that those kind of claims are wrong, and that's enough for most people, and that's fine. But if you want to know why those things are wrong, how it is that the scientists themselves, beyond simple matters like fraud and lying and so forth, which we see a lot from top experts and rulers and the like, but most scientists are sincere in their beliefs. They're just vastly over certain, or they're wrong, but they don't know how they're being wrong. And that's the level at which we need to fix science. Now, a lot of people can just, follow along. They can gain entry to, podcasts like yours and so forth.
The woman found it.
Others that show what things are doing wrong. Oh, that's the other one. Yeah.
The woman found it. Thank you, V.
And then we can get people to sort of grasp these more fundamental things, but they are more difficult. I mean, it's you were there. We were all there last week or a week and a half ago. I guess we were out back in Arizona for another epistemological boot camp, or I guess we called it. And there were difficult subjects being broached. What is the nature of probability? If we're speaking of uncertainty, we must use probability. How do we then understand what probability is and so forth? And how does that relate across a broad range of sciences, everything from medicine, biology, all the way to astrophysics, fundamental quantum probability, and all this kind of a thing. So it's difficult. We're not going to get everybody along in that kind of a thing. But we can get people to understand that because people are using these procedures that they think is guaranteeing them certainty are not. We could just show that they're wrong on that kind of a thing. Whether they delve deeper into the mechanics of why exactly it's wrong, that's going to be only for a fraction of people, I think.
Do you think that one of the things that struck me years ago already was that in neuroscience, there was this time. I've been in neuroscience. I was in neuroscience for around 18 years. And when I started in neuroscience, I noticed that there was this momentum in the acquisition of physicists. And the reason why was because physicists could make simple models. And models were what every biology's journal wanted you to have a model with a little neuronal network that showed how your data was relevant to brain function. And because these physicists had this toolbox, you could just bring them in to a department and they could be on every paper that needed a model, and every paper needs a model in this kind of scheme. And I was struck by how
what were they doing, like transport models and the like, that kind of thing?
Yeah, but also just simple network models that show that something, some connection could be relevant. To me, it's really just a question of, again, how are we using them, and are we using them to advance our understanding, or are we using them to I don't know,
obfuscate, or to add complexity for the sake of complexity, which turns it into science. It's funny you mentioned this. Just a week ago or 2 weeks ago, somebody had a paper out that looked at literature papers of all things, and I guess these were spoof papers. They had regular papers, and then they had the same papers, but they had equations in them. And the ones that had equations in them, just for no reason, were the ones that were viewed as much more scientific and so forth.
Yeah, wow.
That's the level of stuff. I mean, it's easy to create a model. I mean, not everybody can do it, but once you learn how, it's trivial to create models. That's one of the problems. It's too easy. Science is too easy. It's difficult to understand that maybe, but because science is so easy to do now in a lot.
What happened there? His garage is like my garage. Come on back now, you hear? I don't know, maybe you should snap too. That might help. Come on. He'll call back. I want very much to see if
there's too many people doing it, and numbers of people. Just because there's going to be a lot more error, but it's
something
hear
broke
you.
up
I don't
there.
know if you can hear. There we go.
Yeah, we'll let it catch
it's
up. It's
probably
for a second.
Me. The camera it does a visual acuity check on me and sort of balks.
Yeah, it's all good. So we were talking about models, and it just took for a couple seconds, so it's okay. What is different? I mean, for example, you were in meteorology. They can't get away with crappy models, right? If they use a crappy model, then their prediction for even tomorrow would be off, right? So to a certain
this is you bring up a good point, an excellent point, as a matter of fact, because it's one of the few fields. In fact, one of the very, very few fields that model goodness. The idea of what we call it, the technical term is verification, model verification. That's where it was really born. That's where all the statistics and the probability and the understanding of the philosophy of model goodness arose from meteorology. Because it's for obvious reasons. They make weather forecasts. They come out at least twice a day, and they want to verify how good they're doing. And because they did, they developed all kinds of ideas, all kinds of measures, like numerical measures that show you how good the predictions are behaving and the like. And they use those to sort of feedback and improve the models. And they have the meteorological models over the last 50 years or so. They've increased dramatically. They're now very accurate out to a short period of time. Out to like 4 or 5 days, they're great. Out to beyond that, they diminish in quality fairly rapidly. And they for technical reasons, the atmosphere is just chaotic, and it's not cooperative at times past that.
And let me ask you this, just in the context, if they had more measuring devices, would these models become better, or the models are already at their peak, sort of, in that sense?
No, so not really.
Okay.
Part of the problem they have, we have satellite data, and they can sort of make satellite data for a lot more points and so forth, but their computational power becomes one of the bottlenecks. The other is the atmosphere is chaotic. Ed Lorenz, he was a meteorologist at the time, using early versions of computers. He was running a program, very simple dynamical model. I think he coded it in Fortran. And he was running the thing, and then he had to step away or something like this. And he came back, and somebody else had used the time on the computer. Back then, you had to get time on a computer. You didn't have personal use of it. You had to sort of subscribe for time. And he wanted to restart the computer exactly where it left off. So he reprogrammed in the, using punch cards, the constants that the model spit out at a certain point. But he didn't get them to the exact decimal level, all the way out to however many digits that the computer did. And he found, to his surprise, it diverged wildly. And chaos as a science was born from his paper. And it's amazing. And it turns out to be sensitivity to initial conditions is the sort of defining characteristic of chaos. In other words, you can have a perfectly defined, rigorously analytic, dynamical system that, because it starts off at a slightly, just the tiniest little, you wouldn't think make any difference, initial point, but can diverge wildly from a model that starts off slightly different from it. So that's the way the atmosphere sort of behaves, people are discovering. Now, you can kind of get away with that by making your predictions coarser and only speaking of averages and the like, and do a little bit better in that respect. But it's still meteorology that led the way, and that's how I learned of all this kind of stuff, because that's how I started doing in doing model goodness. How do you check? And so you could apply these same tools to all kinds of models, like we were being foisted upon us all the time. And it turns out a lot of the models just stink. They're terrible. They're never verified. In fact, the leading practice of most science, and most science papers, is to fit a model to data, announce the quality of the fit, and stop. That's it. And then they act as if they've found something. But as we already discussed, anybody could fit a model to data. Anybody could fit any kind of model to any kind of data. It just doesn't take that much ingenuity anymore. And therefore, we're flooded with, just acres and acres of this stuff, of bad science, of just good model fits. Well, so what? These models are never checked against reality after that, but everybody takes it as if it was. That's a huge problem.
Right. And I think you could formulate that in the reverse and say that if your scientific paper doesn't start out with, my model predicts the following, so we checked or measured the following, then you're really not verifying a model. You're actually, again, as you said, making observations and then fitting a model to it, which is a big deal. That's a big difference. You can almost say anything you want if you use that strategy.
Oh, the vast majority of papers in biology and medicine, in all of the soft sciences, almost all their models are like this. They just fit a model, and they're all ad hoc models for the most part. In the soft sciences, they fit the model to the data. They announce after they manipulate the data and the model that the model fits well, and that's it. And now we're supposed to take their word that they have found some causative agent in nature.
Right.
And it's just not the case. They may have happened upon something. They may have got lucky, but it's not because of their procedures that they're correct. It's just by chance, by luck, that they're often right, or by some intuition too. A lot of scientists are smart guys, but it doesn't mean that the procedures they're using are guaranteeing them the kind of veracity that they tell us that they have. That's why when people say follow the science, no, it isn't like that. We should not follow the science until that science has been independently, by disinterested parties, checked, and its accuracy, its predictive accuracy. Otherwise, we'd never know.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is because broken science brings together this really weird group of people where there can be lots of owners of CrossFit gyms or athletes or martial artists or people interested in nutrition or training. And then also, physicists and people like yourself with a million different things in their background. And what I'm wondering is a lot of times we get so deep into that discussion that I love the list that Greg has made of all of the pseudosciences, but I felt like the last meeting was missing a little session about concrete examples, which is what you said earlier. And I almost want to suggest that somebody should build a website of concrete examples of what the model is and how it's not ever tested. I mean, the ones that I've been plugging for a long time are the model of antibodies equals immunity, but they never really test that. When they do, they don't get the answer that their model predicts they should get, but they don't care. And so I wonder if it wouldn't be useful for us to make a list like that. That was my first thing. And I also have a thing about funding, but what do you think about that?
I think it's a fantastic idea. Of course, absolutely. I do these things all the time, maybe once or twice a week. I publish a piece daily, but maybe once or twice a week is looking at bad papers, and from all range of science that use these techniques. So yeah, it would be very worthwhile. That's a good project. I am going to consider that and how to bring it about. Putting it more on a more systematic basis. I think that's a fantastic idea.
I mean, neuroscience is just littered with models of how the brain works that have like two variables. And it's extraordinary. I mean, and then they take an fMRI measurement and look, there it is. We got some difference between these two relative signals, and it looks a lot like our model.
That's a perfect example of the type of thing where models, it's model upon model. The fMRI, you know this better than I do, but for your listeners probably know it better than I do too. But the fMRI, the output from that is already a model. It's already a model. It's not like they've gone into the brain and dissected, taken a look at this neuron here. Oh, yeah, it's in this configuration over here. It's in this. No, this thing is an inverse problem, and it's already a model. So there's uncertainty already in the data that you have out of it. And then they use this uncertain data as if it were certain downstream and further models. And to some of the most, preposterous things. I mean, Sam Harris he has one I picked apart a long time ago. Just ridiculous things. More people are more likely to believe in Santa Claus if the subluxus area of the brain lights up and they're, all kind of statistical nonsense that they try to pull off. Because it shows how well their model could fit, the model of the model. And, so yes, all these areas, they all suffer from the same problems. Over-modeling.
What do you
Well, you have to have models in science, but they're not verified.
Another place that models probably play a more reasonable role in describing reality is in business, where uncertainty equals risk. Is there any way we could use the idea that businesses don't use models that don't work. Insurance companies don't use models that don't work. So there have to be people that understand that model verification is at the heart of knowledge generation.
Turn it up again.
Oh yeah, sorry. Did you hear what I just said? I'm gonna let that come back.
Yeah, business models about verification of knowledge generation.
And business models use uncertainty as risk, and so there's a lot of sort of feedback in business for their models in actuarial science and whatever. So there have to be people that, from a professional perspective, understand how, if they do it like this at work, but academic science does it like that, then there have to be lots of people that could be woken up very easily who, just because of their professional background, this will just snap into their head, don't you think? Or
I think you're absolutely right. Actuaries are an excellent point, because if the insurance companies didn't model accurately, they would stand to lose a lot of money. Of course, the other problem after that is not scientific, but sort of sociological. The government comes in and then begins to regulate them because their models are sometimes too accurate and they're not politically desirable accuracies.
Is that so?
So that's a whole other problem.
Oh wow, I didn't know that happened. Okay.
Well, we don't want to talk about all this idea, but there's official. Some groups need more help from the government than others, and so the government steps in and modifies it. Well, you're not allowed to have noticing of certain things and so forth.
Now
so
I see what you mean. Yeah,
there is that, but actuaries do a good job of looking at how well their models portray, and because they're not the most complex models in the world. They're more or less just counting. Mm-hmm. Here's what happened, and here's what we can expect to happen again in the future, which is a very good way to do things.
Right.
Not that the math is simple. I don't mean that, but I mean to say that as far as model complexity goes, it's not that difficult.
Would you want to, for my viewers, just take a crack at a brief explanation of how the null hypothesis falsification thing isn't actually verifying models, and pull an example out of your brain at random? Is that a
Yeah, it's a very good question. The null hypotheses in statistics, it's kind of the straw man of statistics. And everybody knows the straw man is a sort of informal fallacy. It's set up to be able to knock down easily. Normally what happens is you set up an ad hoc model, something like a regression, very common thing, and you relate some X to some Y, some measure to some observable thing that you're interested in. And the null hypothesis is that whatever your X is has nothing to do with this Y. And you encapsulate that into a probability model, a parameterized probability model, and you set the value of that parameter at some level, typically 0. You say, if this parameter exactly equals 0, precisely exactly equals 0, why, that's my null hypothesis. And then you calculate all kinds of numbers, namely like a p-value, a bit of arcane magic, that if it's small enough, you can go waving your wee p-value in front of people saying, look how small my p-value is. I have disproved my null hypothesis, and therefore the opposite of the contrary of the null hypothesis must be true. If we've said this parameter is exactly precisely equal to 0, and the parameter is a sort of measure of strength, therefore it's not 0. The null hypothesis has been shown to be false, and so not 0. Therefore, it must be important. This X must be important in describing this Y. Of course, it's not true. For one thing, you've never disproved the null hypothesis. You've just made an act of will. You said, you know what, I'm going to decide that this null hypothesis is not significant. And what does significant mean? Significant means the p-value is small. And what does the p-value being small mean? Well, it means significant. It's a circular definition. It's just an act of will to say, I think this correlation is causation. And that's it. I think this correlation that I have found is causation. and you have some mathematical apparatus that helps you in this ritual. One of the guys who was at the thing last week, Gerd Gigerenzer, it's his phrase, the ritual of statistics or ritualized statistics or something. Just following these things to sort of bless your results, you run these typical procedures over them, and if things work out, well, then you claim that you have found something. So null hypotheses, we can eliminate them entirely. We don't need them in science at all. We could instead form our models in this predictive sense. If you say that X, knowing what X is, tells you something about Y. So one of my favorite examples is, I've used this example many times, attendance at a 4th of July parade when you're young. That's our X. The attendance at a 4th of July parade when you're young predicts whether or not you're going to turn out to be a Republican. That's our Y.
You're frozen again. Just hold on 1 second. Darn it. He's got to fix that camera. At least he stopped at a place where I can accurately characterize where he needs to pick
hypothesis
up again.
is
okay,
that.
Hold on a second. You're catching up again. Your camera.
Parade attendance has.
Yeah.
I'm
so
sorry?
your camera just cut you off. So
I don't know what the deal is.
It's okay. You're at. I cut you off
cold.
perfect. It's right at the part where you said, "Okay, parade attendance predicts whether or not you're going to be a Republican," and then it stopped. So.
All right. So the null hypothesis is parade attendance has nothing to do with it, whether you're going to be a Republican or Democrat or something like this. So you form this model, you put it in a regression, you get a wee p value, which is what these researchers from Harvard did. And they said, yes, attendance at a 4th of July parade when you're young predicts whether or not you're going to be a Republican. And that was what the headlines read. So, these young patriotic little kids you're imagining are being radicalized into being far right extremists,
flag wavers,
by attending 4th of July parades. But they cheated. They didn't use 4th of July parade attendance. What they did was they looked at people's residence when they were young, the address that they thought they lived at when they were young. And then they went back into the meteorological records and looked whether or not it rained on the 4th of July. And if there was any precipitation on the 4th of July, they said there was no parade. And the child could not have gone. And if it did not rain, if it was any kind of cloudy or clear day, they said, well, there must have been a 4th of July parade, and there must have been the kid attending it. That's the level of science. It's absolutely absurd because I always use this joke, but in San Francisco, of course, it never rains on the 4th of July, almost never. And so the city should be teeming with Republicans because they would all go to these parades and so forth. But because we have this null hypothesis that's so easy to swat down, I mean, if you're not rejecting your null hypothesis, you're not trying hard enough. It's always possible to do. It just requires a little bit of ingenuity, and you could do it. That's why we have so much bad science.
Yeah, wow, that's a really good example, because there you're really actually testing for even raining on 4th of July. It's not even the parade, right? So that's one thing, but I really feel like that's a very good analogy for how far we are from actual understanding of what happened during the pandemic. They want you to believe it's as simple as some RNA molecule was spilled in a puddle in Wuhan and now it's everywhere. But there's so much involved in that assumption that it's a massive pile of assumptions in the end. And I think it's useful to think of that as a model of reality that makes predictions. If you say that that's the way the pandemic worked, then that makes all kinds of predictions about how future RNA should transmit around the world and how these future signals could be found. And I think that's where this whole thing would really fall apart like it should. I mean, because again, if you challenge them to make predictions, they can't. And that's, I feel, another side of the coin with regard to models being fitted to data versus, making a model and then going out and seeking validation of it. I don't know where I don't know where I was going with that question, but
no, it's absolutely right. You're absolutely right. If you can't make predictions of observables. It's the whole point is these observables are the things that are supposed to matter to us. And if you can't make skillful predictions, that's a technical term, skillful predictions of these things, then you have no business foisting it off onto the public and making us follow the science. It's absurd. It's absurd.
Well, that's the reason why I think it's important for people to understand then that if done well, and even with malevolence, for example, if they want to create the illusion of pandemic potential using academic biology, they can do it. And they can even put p-values behind it, and they can get peer review behind it. So this whole system, right, has been distorted into, they call it knowledge, but it's not knowledge. It's not generating knowledge. And I really feel that big picture is something that a lot of people can get a grasp on. And if they do, it might put them in a place of healthy skepticism that gives them also a small toolbox. You know, if you approach these problems as, okay, what is the model that they are presenting to me? And try to understand the cartoon version of reality that they are foisting upon you with the story that they tell, and then evaluate whether or not that model makes any predictions that have value. I don't think that's hard well, it could be hard for some people, but I think there are a lot of people who are capable of doing
Shouldn't be. It shouldn't be difficult. I mean, the best science we have, all science uses models. It's not using models that's the problem. That we should emphasize. You have to have a model because you can't encompass all of reality all at once. You have to have a slice of it. You have to have some abstraction and some kind of model. That's not wrong, but the model should at least have proved itself. And fitting past data is nothing. It's absolutely zero. It's necessary, but it's far from sufficient because in any set of past data that you give me, in any field, I can fit not just one, but any number of models to it, and to arbitrary precision. I can fit them perfectly. I can always find at least one model that will fit that past data perfectly. And this is a absolutely trivial mathematical exercise. So that we have sophisticated models, and they're done on a computer, and they're done by experts, and the model's been peer reviewed by people who also create their own models, means nothing. It's absolutely nothing. It adds nothing to, like you say, it's not generating knowledge. It's generating noise. It's only when these models are verified and we're found. And again, it has to be by disinterested people. It can't be the same people who create the model and then make predictions to say, yeah, trust us, everything's fine. No. We should know enough about now how the world works that we cannot have people who have an extreme interest in their own project be their own judge. You know, there's legal maxims that guide this kind of stuff. We need those same maxims to guide science. That was one of the useful discussions I think we had too over the last week.
Right. I think a concrete example for people that are listening or watching for what Matt just said would be a mechanical model of the solar system, and you could crank it backwards and you can see that, oh wow, last month it's okay, and the month before that it's okay, and wow, it works for that eclipse from 2 months ago. But then you crank it forward and you go to tomorrow and the moon is backwards, and then you go a week farther than that and it's like the earth turns upside down. Then something inside of that box is not working correctly, because even though when you crank it backwards it seems to recapitulate the past astronomical data, when you crank it forward, if it doesn't make a prediction that happens in the future, then those gears are not working. And I think if you apply that to some of these biological models or these nutritional models or these, a lot of these pandemic models, you get to the point where when you crank that thing forward, it's useless. It's absolutely useless.
That's precisely it. And it's even worse than the picture than you're painting. Because think about this. Think about that model we have. Now, we do have a model of the solar system, like a Copernican type model. We do crank it forward, and we do see that it does work rather well. However, there was an older model, a Ptolemaic model that had all these epicycles of things spinning this way and that way. That model also predicted very well. It predicted beautifully. So even if this is why it's a bare minimum to get the model to make good predictions. That's the first entry. After that, it still doesn't mean that you have proved you found a real cause of something.
I
That's
love
only
that.
the first
Oh,
step.
I love
After
that
you have a lot more to do.
I love
have
that
a
you
lot more
said
to
that.
do.
Wow, that's really spectacular. I love that you said that. And that's really where the grinding of science happens, when there are two models that work pretty well, and now you need to come up with experiments that's able to dissect their predictive value. Like that I imagined as a kid was what all scientists were doing, was at
Me too.
the cutting edge of knowledge, deciding between the two best models, with a clever experiment that got them a lab. Like, obviously, isn't that what they're all doing? I don't know.
Sometimes we can't always do experiments, like in cosmology and so forth, or they're very limited. But yeah, that's it. That's it. We have to find, like I'm always saying, we have to. This brings us back to broken science. One of the things that's broken about science is the metaphysics. In order to do physics, you have to first have a metaphysics. So we need to understand the limits of the metaphysics that we currently use, and of possible replacements, and the superiority of replacements and so forth. But that's a whole other discussion. That's why it's very difficult to explain these kinds of things, because we have to first get past the point where we recognize we've had a broken model, and then we have to get to the point where we realize that models are not being used in a predictive sense, and then we have to realize that we have to have a firm understanding of what it means to cause, and what does cause something mean, and all that kind of thing. So we really have to fix the foundations of science, and that's kind of what this broken science thing's about.
I heard you leading or having a discussion randomly between sessions, and it had to do a little bit with this, the idea that the table doesn't exist because actually it's mostly space, and then if we go farther and farther and farther, all of a sudden there's no causes at all, or something like this. And that's really kind of where, in a sort of, I'm terrible at these kinds of discussions, but that's sort of where Sam Harris is with regard to, free will and everything else. Is just, we're all particles moving, right? And if we just had enough data, we would be able to predict the future and everything. And I don't know.
Of course, I think that's false. And that he does. He's the kind of guy that there's not, the table's not really there because it's mostly empty space. And my metaphysics says the table's here. It's real. In fact, the particles don't exist in it anymore. They only exist virtually in potentia. They're now part of the thing that is the table. There's no separation of particles and atoms anymore that makes the table. It just is a table, just as common sense shows it to you. And of course, about free will, I always make the joke. It's a standard joke, but it's true that you read these guys' papers who try to prove to you that free will doesn't exist. In every one of these papers, they always say, if only people understood they couldn't make choices, they would make better choices. So they always want to save the world by telling us that we really can't make choices. But it's absurd. It's absurd. Here, what are they doing? They're using their free will to write it. That contradiction, when you call them on it, they'll just say, oh, no, that doesn't work. It's an illusion. Okay, fine. It's an illusion. Who is having the illusion?
Right. Wow. Yeah.
Who is having the illusion? What is
really
having
wonderful.
the illusion? It's a bluff. It's always a bluff. There's a lot of bluffs in science, and that's one of them.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to put it. That's great. I'm just sort of humbled by the fact that the first couple of these meetings were so overwhelming to me, that the big picture of how to use this as a way to bring people to the light of things. It really felt like this was the first time where Greg nailed it, where other people nailed it, and where I was comfortable enough in my seat to absorb it. And so I'm very, very excited about being able to apply these ideas, as you do now, to biological papers, and to think about what I'm really calling out as far as what's broken with how they're doing it. And the other thing that was missing from my descriptions was understanding that there were lots of people who've thought about this, right? It's not some kind of secret. I mean, people have written books like you, but before you as well, that part of the reason why we're here is because people like Popper wrote stuff. And so it is important. I was pretty naive to all of that literature. And so it's been a big eye-opening experience for me to realize that in the back.
Well, that's just it. You could go through as a scientist. I did. I went through the whole thing. Cornell, I got my master's in atmospheric, PhD, whatever. Many people. You never once have to be confronted by any of these philosophical matters. Never. You can go through and finish. At the end, you're going to ask, what is science? Well, science is what I do.
Yeah, right.
That's an answer, but it's not a very good answer.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what most people's answer is. And if they've absorbed anything, they've absorbed this idea of the Popperian, falsifiability, and you now see the limits of that. But most scientists don't, because they sort of dismiss a lot of philosophers.
Well,
I think they should dismiss a lot of them. There's a lot of these academic philosophers, kind of postmodernistic kind of nonsense that they preach. It doesn't seem to have any bearing on what a scientist does, and they're right, it doesn't. But you still can't operate and be a scientist without some philosophy. You might not recognize that it's a philosophy, but you have one. You absolutely must have a philosophy in order to apply the skills that you've learned to build your models, to understand your models, to know what a model is, make predictions, all these kinds of things.
I mean, I'll give you an example of how bad, and I'm going to burn myself here, but I think it's an important example. I think you'll be able to see this. So if you had a neuron in a slice of brain where I used to work, and it would be surrounded by other neurons, of course. And in that slice, there would also be axons, which were coming in from other brain regions that were cut off, but were still transmitting neurotransmitter to the neuron that you're going to record from. And so one of the measurements that you would get from this recording would be these spontaneous events, which would look like this. And they're basically signals that are coming from these synapses, which have been cut but are still active. And you can see the synaptic events in real time as this neuron receives them. Now, interestingly, one of the ways that you create this scenario where you can write a paper about it would be to apply a drug here. And if the baseline amount of this signal were to change, then you would say that somehow or another that drug is interacting with the receptors or the proteins on these and changing the release probability of the glutamate there. And so then you start to understand how the drug works or doesn't work. Now, of course, this assumption would be backed up by pharmacological blocking here and all kinds of other things like that. But my point is more abstract in the sense of, if you imagine how complex the brain is, it's pretty easy to get here and have a significant result when you pharmacologically alter the circuit. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because I feel as though we're at the verge of being able to explain to people how it is. And with where I wasn't, I'm going to stop talking very soon. When I was in grad school, no one ever used the word straw man to describe the null hypothesis. And that was partly because it was kind of a sacred ritual. You would never be so, how would you say, coy or it's almost like sarcastic, and it's not the right word, but you're being so honest if you said that it was a straw man. But it would be so useful from the perspective of teaching a graduate student exactly what this game is. Quite frankly, I feel as though, knowing what I know now in broken science, I could go back to academia and be much more successful because I understand what the formula is asking for, and it's not clouded by this ideal of what I imagine I'm doing. Can you relate to that illusion that I created for myself?
That's absolutely it. That's how people, that you described how a lot of people wake up from the rituals that they're practicing and understanding that this method just doesn't give what they want it to give. I mean, what you're trying to do there is you're trying to fundamentally understand the causes at play. And that's exactly the right way to do it. That's absolutely the right way to do it. But it's brutal hard work. right? I mean, there's all kind of, you realize after you set up a little simple experiment like you just drew right there, and you saw the signals, then suddenly you realize, or you have other evidence that comes in later, there's other things that could account for that change in signal too. And you have to keep eliminating them one by one by one, and it takes a very long time. It's very difficult to do.
The very best,
it's just brutal hard work.
Absolutely.
And so that's what science is really like. But we've tried to make it too easy, and it is now far too easy.
Yeah.
Just apply this formula, and if it pops out, this number pops out, well, then you prove what you wanted to do.
It's very sweet the way you say it, because actually I felt when I was stepping out of neuroscience, or when my career was waning before I got let go, it was because I was still having to put in hundreds of hours to get my data set. I couldn't just roll someone into an fMRI machine and then go back to my computer for a couple weeks and then publish a paper. I had to find something that was an effect and then do some other experiments that showed that the effect wasn't from something else. And that was the pharmacological blocking and this kind of thing. And so I did feel a little bit like I was part of a small group of people that was still, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, I'm trying to say how I felt it didn't fit in. I didn't have this 5 papers a year machine going. I couldn't see it. I didn't have an answer to that problem, which was, you're going to need 8 papers in the next 3 years or you're not going to make it. Yep. And it's like, what? If you tell me that, I could say immediately in that meeting, well, then I'm not going to make it, because what I do doesn't work like that. And so do I need more students? I don't know what the answer was, but I was already finding that wheel unable to grind. I just couldn't do it anymore.
Oh yeah, for everybody who hasn't been exposed to academia, it's toxic in that way. It really is publish or perish. It's terrible. It's terrible. That accounts for the flood of bad papers. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're pushing out a lot of nonsense just because they have to keep their positions, or to bring in grants to pay for themselves and their lab, or, and most importantly, to provide the kickback to the deans in the form of overhead. That's you could write 1 paper a year or even none if you're bringing in good overhead. If you're bringing in that, which is, it was at Cornell at one point, I think it was up to like 60%, 59.5% overhead. I mean, so you get the grant, it grants $1 million, and then they tack on another $590,000 overhead, and that just goes to the college, which becomes part of the slush funds for the deans.
Yeah, absolutely. When
that pleases them.
My grant my grant R01, for example, if I had, when my supervisor got an R01, he paid 155% of my salary to the university. So 55% of my salary was rent, and he did that for every student and himself. So that's quite a load of money if you think there are 130 faculty members just in that department that are all working under the same model, and all those grad students walking around are all paying rent to the tune of thousands of dollars a year. I mean, it's extraordinary amount of money. That's why they can pay deans millions of dollars a year. They pay deans as much as they pay basketball coaches these days.
Yep.
It's extraordinary. So how about this? What if we got a bunch of weaponized money and started funding science that was,
we do have that in a way, though. Private companies that are not tied up with the government.
Okay.
That are not tied up with the government. That proviso is the strongest one I could possibly make.
You can say
those
it twice.
That have an interest with the government and it becomes political. Well, that's just the same as being the government. That's where things can be done. So it's exactly that. It's private money in a patronage-like system, trying to discover things for the sake of discovering them. They could be towards the desire of having a useful product or something. There's nothing per se wrong with that. It's only when it becomes, as we saw with COVID, when it becomes, a very political thing, that the whole thing becomes somewhat difficult. And it becomes no different than regular academia. And as well as I do, the same people go in and out of these corporations into the government that judges the granting agencies and all this kind of stuff. It's the same set of people. So
yeah, it's a very difficult problem to get your head around. I think one of the things that I liked that I heard somebody say at the meeting, which I also think is something that can get people's wheels turning if they haven't thought about this before, is that all the real good science is top secret. I don't know to what extent that's really true or if it's just funny, but I do think that that identifying places like, meteorology, like actuarial science, where models are required to verify, we can find examples where we can push science in that direction over time. We can teach, if we could break into a university and teach this to undergraduates, that would be great. We'd probably ruin their graduate experience, but I don't know. I'm still trying.
We can do it. We can do it. The tools are there. Like I say, the tools we have. It's not unknown. I mean, there's all kinds of investigations that can go on to improve these tools and so forth, but the basic set are there waiting for us to be used.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Can do it now.
Can I ask you a personal question? What do you do for to make ends meet? Are you teaching anywhere? Do you have an online course, or I mean, why not do an online course?
I should do an online course. No, I basically have private clients.
Okay.
Would
you want any help with an online course? Like, I could be your technical guy, or I could.
I need to figure out. I do need to do it. I keep swearing I'm going to, but video is not. I'm very naive about video, as you can see.
Oh, but you could, for example, you could record it in your own home.
I have a chalkboard.
Right, but then you send me the video and I edit it for you and add subtitles and all that stuff. I can do all that. I would be happy to do it, and
we'll chat about that.
Okay. I would think this would be really a good idea. And also I would obviously learn from it a lot too. I think that's where we need to go. I think we need people like you taking over this thing. I mean, if you can, how awesome would it be if you meet somebody randomly and say, oh yeah, I took Matt Briggs's course last year. Bang. It should be something that people put on their website or people put on their social media. I think you're a guy who, you have the kind of charisma that can do it. You're a good speaker, and you've got all of the work done already in your books. You've already thought about this and developed these ideas, and so there's nothing.
I even have colored chalk.
Well, there you go. I mean, is it the fancy stuff from Japan, or is it just good colored
No,
chalk?
That's the one I got. I got the ones that Greg gave me. He gave me a box of this Korean.
Yeah. That's right.
That stuff is good too.
Yeah, and no dust.
It really is smooth.
Yeah.
You write that stuff on there.
That's fabulous. Stuff. Oh my gosh, that's great. I love writing. That's awesome. We are at like 59 minutes, and I don't know what we said for time, but it feels like a very good time to wrap up. And you just promised to come back because I'll have you on with more material and more questions next time. We can go into something specific that I get out of Jane's as I read it.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to put this link up one more time. This is where you can find, unfortunately, it's an Amazon link, but that's the easiest for me. You can see his full name, William M. Briggs. You can see the books that he's got available. I would recommend the yellow one, And Everything You Believe Is Not Wrong, although he has contributed to this Price of Panic, which is specifically about the COVID thing. And you can also find him at, I think, williammbriggs.substack, something like that. Or is it William Briggs?
WM Briggs.
Sorry.
Substack, yeah.
WM Briggs at substack.com. So thank you very much, Matt, for joining me. Can you remind me again? Well, maybe I'll do that offline. But I wanted to say hello to your wife as well. And for whatever reason, my mind is blanking on a name. So please give her a hug and say hello for me. And we will have you on within a month, I guarantee it, unless you really object to it. Because
anytime.
Cool. Very good. Very good. Thank you, Matt, for joining me, and I will talk to you again soon. Yep. Bow, zowie. Okay, that went well. Thank you very much, guys, for joining me. I'm going to put this little slide back up again. This is, of course, the Broken Science meeting that happened a couple weeks ago. I hope Matt wasn't surprised that I let him go there so quick. I'll call him back on the phone. We are a group of people loosely organized around two people named Emily Kaplan and Greg Glassman. Greg Glassman is the originator, the creator of CrossFit, a very smart guy who actually had a very smart papa named Jeff Glassman, who worked for Hughes Aviation. And it was his upbringing with his very intelligent dad that has brought him all the way to understanding this stuff, because CrossFit ran into legal problems with fake science. Basically, fake science was published to try and say that CrossFit injures people. And over the course of investigating this, he found out that his dad's been right about science his whole life. And it has put him on this crusade to try and, leave a legacy for his children and for our children of his dad and himself, and these philosophers like Stove, these thinkers like Stove, and also our contemporaries like Matt Briggs. And so I really think this is one of the most worthwhile sort of initiatives, and I'm so humbled to be considered a small part of it. So thank you, Emily, thank you, Greg, and thank you, Matt, for coming on the show. And I think we're going to have a lot of interesting conversations as we go forward. At some point in time, of course, we're going to have Greg on the show, but I don't want to play that card too early, because number one, I know he's a busy guy, and so that'll be hard to organize. But number two, I want to have all of my ducks in a row and already have been paid back a little bit to him, the stuff that I've learned through a series of streams that this is the first one of. So thank you very much, guys, for joining me. This has been Gigaohm Biological, a high resistance, low noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. 19th of March, 2024. The afternoon shows are going to be a streak because I really like this time frame. Thanks for joining me, guys. 73 people in the chat. Very an understandable conversation, I hope. Good to see you, Pamela. Thanks for the link in the chat. She's always good for that. And I see Janet Reno in the audience. Awesome. I didn't see you there earlier. I'm sorry, Janet. Janet's one of my favorite anonymous viewers, because obviously it's not Janet Reno. It might be Borg. Some reason I think it might be Borg or something. I don't know. Anyway, thanks very much for joining me, guys.